All right. Good afternoon, guys. We are going to get started. I just want to quickly introduce Rikav, who will be in charge of ACT English. You guys had Lauren for ACT reading last time. So the plan is to go 4 to 5 an hour, maybe 4:55 or so. Then we're going to take a 5 minutes break, and then I'll be basically coming back here to do ACT math. So a couple of instructions: you got to have your phones turned off at all times. No talking. You need to have calculators for the next section. May not be right now. The most important thing I want to tell you guys is ask questions. Please just don't sit here. This is not your typical school. Rikav's job and my job and anybody. We have a total of 4 instructors teaching this class. Our job is to make sure that you guys learn here. Sounds good? So if you have a question, ask. And again, no cell phones during the class. And Rikav is going to get started with ACT English. Okay? And it's 4:01. Time to get started. All right? Rikav, all yours.
All right, cool. All right, as Manoj said, I'm Rikav. I go to Lincoln High School in Sioux Falls. I'm a senior this year, and I scored a perfect 36 on the ACT, and I got all 75 questions right on English. So I'm pretty familiar with the stuff. But yeah, I'm going to be talking about English this whole time. So in case you guys don't know, there's just some general stuff. The English test is the first one you're going to take once you get into the room, once you get into the testing room. And it has 75 questions, and you'll have 45 minutes to do them. So that leaves you with 36 seconds per question. That's not really that important because we're not going to be counting by each question. We'll be focusing more on whole passages. So there's going to be 5 passages on the English section, and each one is going to have 15 questions in it. So we're going to focus our timing not on, like when you're in the room, I don't want you thinking about how many seconds has it gone after each question. You should be focused more on like your passage. And since there's 5 passages and you've got 45 minutes, so try to keep it around 9 minutes per passage. That'll be your pacing. But we don't really have to worry too much about that right now, just some general stuff. We'll focus on pacing in later weeks. But today, I really want to talk about a small section of the ACT, a small part in English that, to me, I think is the easiest to do, but also the easiest to lose points on. So if you get really solid at this right now, you won't have a problem. They're going to be super fast questions. They're going to be super easy actually on the test. And that's punctuation. So I know we speak with English every day, but we don't like use commas perfectly in our texting and stuff. We don't use semicolons all the time. So we're just going to talk about punctuation today. And what I really want you guys to do is, if you have like a piece of notebook paper that you can rip out, that'd be really nice. I remember before the first time I took the ACT, I just called it my cheat sheet of punctuation. And I stuck it next to my bedside. And for about a month before the test, every day I would just read over the rules, just once before I go to bed. It took me like 5 minutes. And then on the ACT, I don't think I even thought about punctuation questions like at all. So these ones are gonna eventually become like second nature, you guys, if you just keep looking over them every once in a while. So I just want you guys to have this little cheat sheet resource so that you guys can use it whenever. So we can get started with those. The first and most common piece of punctuation you're gonna see on the ACT is commas. I'm sure you guys know this is your most common piece of punctuation. You're going to see this all the time, everywhere. You see it in your books and stuff that you read in school now. Super important. You should remember not to be commaphobic. Don't just stop using commas, because a lot of people don't use them as much as they should. And then there's some people that love to put commas everywhere. They're going to be like super comma happy, and sentences start to feel like super duper choppy. So you got to find a good happy medium in between those two. That's what we're going to talk about. There's going to be like 10 rules, I think, 10 main rules. And you'll read them later on this week in your homework too, so you guys will be super familiar with these later on. But there's a couple of basic things let's talk about first. Does everybody know the difference between an independent and a dependent clause? Mostly, yeah? Okay, cool. Just in case nobody does, we'll talk about an independent clause is something that can stand alone. I went to class today. That can stand alone. A dependent clause is something that can't stand alone just as a sentence by itself, like, because I went to class. That doesn't feel like there's more stuff that needs to happen in that sentence. So like a dependent clause can't be a sentence by itself and an independent one can. Now this one, to me, is the most important comma rule. Some of them are going to be really easy that you guys have been using your whole life, but this one maybe... Oh, sorry, did somebody say something on the Zoom? Oh, okay, they muted themselves again. All right, never mind. Yeah, this is, to me, the most important rule, and this is how I write it. All right, what that means, you're gonna have an independent clause, a comma, a fanboy's word, and then another independent clause. Now, a fanboy's word is a connector, like or, and, nor, but, like those type of words. There will be a section in your homework later this week that'll explain all those and exactly how to use them. But for now, this is just like a baseline rule, where a lot of times people don't use this comma because it doesn't feel super necessary. Like for example, I'll grab one of the sentences from here. Alright, you could say, the flesh of a mango is smooth, yet, which is your fanboys, fibers spread out from large kidney-shaped seed. Those two things, I promise you, if you'd seen that on the test, you probably would not remember to put the comma there because it sounds so normal to just go without it that it's really hard to remember to put that comma there. So whenever you see something that has like an and or for, but, or, nor, something like that on a question, check the two fragments outside and see if they are independent. If those both are independent, then you need a comma there. So then once you wrote the rule, I would write your own example underneath it. Whatever type of example you can think of. Think of an independent clause, a comma. Try to use and, that's the easiest one to like keep in your notes so you'll remember. And then another independent clause. I went to class and it was fun. That sounds really good without a comma, doesn't it? I went to class and it was fun. But in reality, you need a comma there. I went to class, comma, and it was fun. So if everybody could just think of their own example, I'll give you time to do that, and then we'll move on to the next rule. Alright, has everybody got theirs? Everybody good? Everybody online good? Hopefully. I don't know, they're not going to turn the cameras on. Okay, so the next one I'm sure you guys have been using your entire life. And the rule is that commas are used to set off a list. I'm sure you guys have been doing that pretty much almost your entire life. Probably pretty familiar with this one. So like, I like bacon, comma, eggs, comma, and cheese on my sandwich. Stuff like that. I'm sure you guys have seen this pretty much everywhere. It's super duper used in books we read in school, and I'm sure even in text people use these pretty often. Hold on. Then there's one thing we got to talk about specifically with this one, and that's that Oxford comma. I don't know if all of you guys, do you guys know what that is, the Oxford comma? It's a little comma that sometimes is used, sometimes isn't, where, let's say we have a list of, we'll use that example. This comma right here is the Oxford comma. Some people argue that you should not use that comma, and you should just have bacon, comma, eggs, and cheese. I mean, I don't agree with that. I think it's really good to have that comma there, but some scholars do think it's bad and they don't really want to use it. So on the ACT, you will never be asked to pick if that comma should be there or if it shouldn't. So most of the time they're going to write it like this, but they're not going to make you pick between one or the other because they're both right, technically. So normally you're going to see it like this, and then if you guys are practicing in your own writing or in the test right now, I would practice with this, that it's going to be there, even before the and or the or whatever comes at the end of the list. So I would use commas in between everything, just to be safe. And then again, I'll give you guys time. Did you guys already write like an example in the notes? All right, cool. Everybody did? Cool. We'll move on to the next rule then. All right. This one I'm sure also you guys might be familiar with, but this one's a little bit different. You use commas to separate cities from states and dates, like you use it to separate like the month from the year. So I'm sure you guys have probably seen this one too, like when you write the date. Like what do you mean is the date today? Is that what, 28th? Like that comma's there. It's always going to be written like that whenever it's in word form. Or you could see it like, oh, that should be capitalized. Like that, where we separate a city from a state. So whenever you have a date like this, you want to use a comma, and whenever you have a city from state separation, you want to use a comma. You won't see this one super often actually on the test, but it does show up. So just be familiar with this. Sometimes people want to get antsy and put the comma there, put it between the month and the day, but that's not what you want to do. It always goes right before the year. And then this one you'll see, I think a little bit more than the date. They don't often use the words for dates, but this one you'll see quite a bit where you're separating cities from states. So just be familiar with that. Everybody got an example in their notes? Cool. All right, oops. We'll jump on to the next one then. Okay, this is another one that you won't see a lot on the ACT, but it's totally one that you see in real life all the time. And that is that commas set up quotes. I know we read a lot of fiction books in school, and this comes up all the time in fiction books. When a character is about to say a dialogue or something, there's a comma right before the quote comes on. They try to stay away from this on the ACT. You won't see it a whole lot, but it's one to know, just to remember. Like, I'm sure you guys have seen them. Do you guys need examples for this, or can you guys make your own? Good? Okay, cool. Alright, this is another one you see in fiction books a lot, just because there's a lot of dialogue. This one is, you always use a comma when addressing someone by name. If you're asking someone for something, if you're giving someone a command, whatever, if you address them by their name, there needs to be a comma right after it. Like, if I'm asking someone to turn off the lights, or like turn off the AC, I say, Manoj, turn off the AC. There needs to be a comma there. Manoj, comma, turn off the AC. Does that make sense? Did everybody get that? Cool. That one you're mostly going to see in fictional stuff again. Like the ACT loves little fictional passages, so you'll see that a lot with the dialogue ones, but okay, now this one, your book uses a little phrase that I really like in describing this rule, and that's to hug a non-essential phrase. So like when you have a sentence and there's a break in the middle of it, and then you could just keep going with the sentence. That little part in the middle is a non-essential phrase that's not really essential to the sentence. And your book says that you should hug it with commas. You should put commas on both sides of it. So that's that next rule. Where am I on right now? Oh, I need the red one. A really good example that the ACT loves is by the way. They literally use the words by the way. So, my dad, by the way, is at work. You could just say my dad is at work, that's fine. By the way in the middle really is non-essential. So you're gonna put commas on both sides of that. My dad, comma, by the way, comma, is at work. Sometimes it can feel like there's a lot of commas or like too much stoppage going on. But this one you do have to be careful with. You always have to hug an entire non-essential phrase. And they love to trick you on the test by putting a comma in the non-essential phrase. So then you're going to have like a comma, and then there's the non-essential phrase. There might be a comma in there, and then another comma at the end. So they try to scare you off by showing you that there's so many commas. This is probably not the right answer. But if you know the rule, then you're always going to know. Like, that's the one you want to choose. Does everybody have an example for this one already? Cool. Alright. The next one is similar to a non-essential phrase, but this one is called an introductory phrase. So you're going to use a comma after an introductory phrase. An introductory phrase could be in the middle of the night. Or what else do they have in here? During your break. During the break. Or, any kind of introduction, like before a sentence, you want to put a comma right after it, before the rest of the sentence goes on. Like, in the middle of the night, I had to get up to go to the bathroom. You're going to have in the middle of the night, comma, I had to get up to go to the bathroom. And you can remember, if you ever get stuck on the test and don't know if something's an introductory phrase or not, an introductory phrase is always a dependent clause. So if you don't know if you should put a comma there, just quick check. Can this stand alone? If it can't, then you definitely need a comma there. And if it can, then maybe we should look up and consider this rule too. So an introductory phrase is always going to be a dependent clause. Okay. Does everyone have examples for that one too? Is everyone good? Alright, cool. This next one, again, one that you've probably used quite a bit already in your life. A lot of people know this one by heart and do it even when they're talking and they don't even mean to. And that's that a comma would separate two adjectives that describe the same noun. So like, if I'm looking at a tall, fast basketball player, he's tall and fast, I'm describing the same person, the basketball player. And when I use both of those, I need a comma in between those two adjectives. Does that make sense? I always write the rule just like that. You have to remember they have to be describing the same noun though. And they don't have to be just two. There can be even more. Like, you could say poodles have long, tight, curly hair. There's 3 adjectives. Then you could use an adjective, comma, and another one. So, however many adjectives you use to describe the same noun, you want to put commas in between. Does everyone have examples for that? Cool.
So would you have to have one like for tall, fast basketball player? Would you have to have one after fast?
No. If you had used basketball player is like not an adjective, that's a big thing. An adjective would have to be whatever you're describing the person with. So like, if you had another word like lanky, I don't know, that's not a very nice word, but you could say like tall, fast, lanky basketball player. Then that's another one you could add another comma for, but they all have to be adjectives if you want commas in between them. Is everybody good? You got that one? All right. Now this one is our last comma rule here. It's kind of similar to another one we already have up here, which is that hug one. But this is going to be a little bit different. And this is a word I don't know if you guys know, but you're going to use a comma after and a positive. Does anyone know what a positive is? You know what it is?
It's kind of like the unnecessary.
Kind of like it, yeah. It's like a further explanation of something. Like you're gonna like rename or describe something that came right before it, the noun that came right before it. So it's like a little phrase. It's really often used with people. Like if you say, let's see, is there a good example in here? You could say like, Leo Messi, the greatest soccer player of all time, and then continue with the rest of the sentence. So it's really similar to a non-essential phrase, but this is expanding on the original thing that you're really going to see this at the beginning of sentences normally. You'll see a name, a comma, an explanation of the person, and then a continuation from there. So how you'd write this rule is just that you need a comma after and a positive. How do you spell positive? I don't even know if that's right. So whenever you want to explain something, like in between a sentence, it's really similar to a non-essential phrase, but this is like an explanation of something that came right before it. And they use this one kind of the same way as they use that hug one. So when I took the ACT the first time, I didn't even know about this rule. I just used the hug rule. And most of the time they're going to work the same, but it's nice to know this one too, just in case they do give you something really specific like this. Does anybody have any questions so far? Do these make sense? I'm sure you guys knew a lot of these already, but yeah. So commas, again, your most common type of punctuation on the ACT. You're going to see a lot of questions like this. And if you're really familiar with these, you study these really well, then these questions should be super easy and super fast. You're going to save a lot of time. When you see a question come up and it's a punctuation question, you should probably know these like instantly, and they're going to save you a bunch of time and let you think about harder questions normally. What did I do with my eraser? There it is. All right, we're going to move on. Does everybody have these written down? Is that okay? Cool. We're going to move on to our next type of punctuation. All right, this is your second most common type of punctuation on the ACT. And that would be colons. Hang on, I gotta know how to spell this too, jeez. Okay, all right. everybody knows what a colon looks like, right? It's just little 2 dots. I use these all the time in my notes for fun, but I don't use them correctly, so not a good thing. But you'll see these quite a bit on the ACT too. And they're not to be confused with semicolons. Those are different. We're going to talk about those in a minute. Colons are very different. They have very different rules, serve very different purposes. All right. The first rule with the colon, the most common rule, is that you want to introduce a list. I'm sure you guys write lists all the time in your writing and you don't use colons, and that's okay because this is a very specific kind of introducing a list. Normally when you introduce a list, you might just go into it, like the bacon, egg, and cheese example we had earlier. I like bacon, egg, and cheese on my sandwich. That works just fine. You don't need a colon there. But then sometimes when you introduce a list in a specific way, like I went to the grocery store and bought the following things, colon. And then you can set up what you bought. I think that's my favorite example. It works really well. But you'll see, it'll feel very, very, very like unnatural to just go and start a list from there. And that's where, right before a list, you're going to use a colon. So like if it says the following things, or sometimes in question form too, you might see it in question form. If you had unlimited money, which of these cars would you buy? Colon, and then it'll give you 3 different options of cars. So you're going to use commas in the list just like you did before, but to set it up right before the list, you're going to use a colon. Alright, does everyone have an example for that? We're good? Alright, this next one is you're going to use a colon to separate 2 independent clauses where the second one is explaining the first one. So you might see it written like this. This is super duper rare. You're not going to see this a lot on the ACT, but it's really important that you do know it and that it is possible, because there might slip in 1 or 2 questions about this. This is kind of one that goes unnoticed sometimes, and a lot of people like naturally don't know how to use it. But if you've done your studying, and you will before the test, then this will not be anything crazy. This will not stump you on the test. You can use this one kind of like a clarification too. It's normally about the first thing and then you're explaining it in the second thing. Of like, an example is, my reason for taking this class is simple, colon, I want to do better on the ACT. So you had your independent clause first, then you had an independent clause after it explaining the first one. Now you could have, here's the big trick about this rule, is that you could have just used a period. You could just use a period in between there and continue on. But this kind of just shows that you know that you're explaining on the second one. But the nice thing is on the ACT, they're never going to have you pick between this and using a period. They're never ever going to make you pick, because one could be more right than the other depending on your style as a writer. And they don't want you to be the one to decide that, because there's not really a more right way. It's the same as the Oxford comma. Some people like it, some people don't. You know, you could choose one or the other way. They both are right, and they're never going to make you pick a more right way. So if you see this and the same exact answer with the period in between, you can cross them both off, because you can't pick one or the other. So neither of those are going to be the right answer. And again, this one's kind of rare, but you will see it every once in a while. So it's good to know it. Does everyone have an example? Cool? All right. And the last one for colons is that colons I know this is gonna suck because I just said that you can't do this, but colons can also introduce quotes. Now, the way a colon introduces a quote is a little bit different than the way a comma does. We just talked about how commas can introduce it. Normally, when you see a comma introducing a quote, it's going to be like, he said, comma, quotation, I want to go to the bathroom, or something like that. Whereas when you use a colon, it's going to be more like, he always believed in the age-old saying, colon, and then you could use your quotations, ask before going to the bathroom. I don't know if that's actually an age-old saying, but something like that, where instead of introducing he said, she said, something like that, it's going to be like more of an explanation type. That's the biggest thing you want to remember with colons. So you're normally going to use them with explanations or something clarifying next. These are your only 3 rules with colons, and this last one, again, you're probably not going to see a whole lot. The ACT does not like to ask you questions about quotations. There's going to be quotations in the passages, plenty, but they don't like to ask you a lot about quotations. So that one will be kind of rare. You guys need more examples for this one, or you guys kind of got it?
I could use one.
You could use one more? Let's see, do they have another one written here? Okay, yeah. They talk about growing up, my mother would tell me over and over again, colon, follow the golden rule. That's another one where you see how it feels more like an explanation than just like a he said or she said type of thing where you would normally use a comma. Does that kind of make sense what I'm saying? Okay, cool. Does anyone else need another example? Cool. Sorry, what was that? Repeat.
Say it the way it's supposed to be written.
Yeah, sure. I'll say it one more time.
Please.
Where'd it go? Growing up, my mother would tell me over and over again, colon, follow the golden rule. And of course, that part where it says follow the golden rule is in quotations. Did you hear that one okay?
Yeah.
Alright, cool. And then people online, do not be afraid to just speak up and ask questions if you guys have them too. Okay, is everyone good to move on here? Alright. We will be done with colons then. Alright, like I mentioned earlier, the next most common one would be a semicolon. Alright, this is the one you use when you're texting for a winky face. It's the one that really looks like one. Okay. The most common rule with the semicolon is to use it like a period. So you could use it any way you would use a period. Like to separate 2 independent clauses. So, I got bored in class, semicolon, I went on my phone. Those are 2 independent clauses that can stand on themselves, and they're separated by a semicolon. Now, another super interesting thing about this, and another little trick for the test, is there's no way to differentiate this from this, or from this. All of these are correct. You can use really any of those. So if you ever see 2 of these with the exact same wording as 2 different answer choices, cross them both out. Because you can't choose one over the other. You normally, as the writer, are going to be able to pick the difference. But on ACT English, they want you to be more of an editor. And no editor can choose, they're all correct. And there's never going to be 2 right answers. So if you see 2 of these, just cross them both out. All right. There's one other semicolon rule. And this one, I've taken the ACT like 3 times, and I've only seen it come up once. This is like super duper rare. You're hardly ever gonna see this. But just in case you do, we'll keep it here. And that is a semicolon is a super comma. Now, some of you may already know this rule, but the ACT doesn't really think that high school kids use this rule a lot, which we don't. Like, we don't normally write with this rule. In essays and texts, whatever, we hardly ever use it. But it's when you're separating things with a list, but within the list, there's already commas. So like the things that you're listing already have commas in them. So now if you use commas like you should to separate a list, it's gonna get super duper annoying to have like 100 commas in that sentence. So like let's say you're listing off some of your favorite cities in the world, and you wanna say like Chicago, Illinois, and Los Angeles, California, and New York, New York. Now when you're listing them, my favorite cities are Chicago, comma, Illinois, like we learned that earlier rule, or we do have to separate them. So we'd have Chicago, comma, Illinois, comma, Los Angeles, comma, California, comma, and it's gonna get really, really, really choppy if we have that many commas. So when, I'm gonna quick write this out. Let's go with easier ones to spell. Normally when we're listing things, we want to use a comma here. Now we're going to use a semicolon. It's going to be like our super comma. It's like a comma but with more power because there's already commas in the sentence. And then yada yada, whatever else city you guys like, I don't know. Sioux City, Iowa, or South Dakota, or Nebraska, whichever part you guys are from, I don't know. Does that make sense? So this one's kind of rare, you're probably not going to see it on the test, but I bet your English teachers are going to love it if you could slip this into your essays or something. It's pretty cool. Alright, those are your 2 semicolon rules. Does everybody have examples for both of those? We good? Everybody online good? I'm going to pretend like they're nodding. Okay, we'll move on. And these last couple pieces of punctuation kind of all blur together. There's so many of them. Like they're kind of all little miscellaneous ones. So I always just label this as other. Just anything else, any other pieces of punctuation. And of course these ones are going to be not super popular on the ACT. You're not going to see them a lot. Like apostrophes, hyphens, dashes. You'll see them, but not as much as your other ones. So you don't have to study these as much, but still really important to know them. We'll start with a couple of apostrophe rules. Does everybody know what an apostrophe is? It's like a upside down comma. Like that. And that happens to be our first rule. That you can use an apostrophe S to signify possession of something. Now I'm sure you guys use this all the time in class. You guys probably know this one really well. There's one little kicker that gets a little bit confusing on the ACT and in real life. I used to really not know the difference between this, but when you have something plural, already plural with an S at the end, like dogs, if you have 2 dogs and you want to say that their favorite food is beef, then normally when people say my dog's favorite food, most of you guys know that you don't need another S, right? We just put an apostrophe there and call it good. Everybody know that? Right? That's only with plural things. So let's say, what's a singular noun that ends with an S? Class, there we go. So if I wanted to say, my class's favorite, and it's a singular class, my class's favorite whatever, then believe it or not, it's gonna have another S. Just because class is singular. So if you have a singular noun and you want to show possession, you do need to have an S at the end, even if the word already ends in S. And again, they try to stay away from that on the ACT because that is kind of not a super common rule. It's another one that people still fight about all the time, so probably won't see that, but cool to know just in case. Alright, and one more thing with this possession rule. If you have something like an in-law that has a bunch of dashes in it, like my brother-in-law, you don't want to say like brothers, ins, laws, like that's too confusing. So when you have something that's like an extended word like that, then you just want to put it on the last word. So like my brother-in-laws, it would just look like just like that. So you're only going to put it on the last word. Does that make sense? It's going to sound really silly when you see an answer choice on the ACT that says like brothers, ins, laws. It's going to look really goofy. You're going to know it's wrong, and you're going to know that this is the answer. Alright, and there's one more last little thing you should know about possession, is that if two people are possessing the same thing, then you only have to use it on the second person's. But if each of them are possessing different things, then you're going to have them on both. So like let's say you have twins, Mark and Gina, and you and your friends are going to their house. You don't have to say Mark's and Gina's house, you can just say Mark and Gina's house. So it only goes on the second one. Just on the second one, not on the first one too. So that's because Mark and Gina are both possessing the house. Now let's say we're talking about Mark and Gina they're not twins anymore, and they're best friends that have houses right next to each other. So now you're talking about how both of their houses are so close to the park. Now you have to say Mark's and Gina's houses are so close to the park. Now if they're separate houses, if they're possessing different houses, then it's going to look like you're going to have apostrophes on both of them. Does that make sense? Cool. Gosh, my writing's really slanted today. Holy cow. I wish I had handwriting like Manoj's. It's too good. I'm never going to be able to beat it. Alright, now the last two things we're going to talk about are dashes and hyphens. Dashes and hyphens are different, even though they look really similar. A dash looks like that, it's long. I don't know how to spell hyphen. That one's going to be shorter. A hyphen is shorter. In some fonts on your Chromebooks, you won't be able to tell the difference, but on the ACT, they're going to make it super duper obvious which one's a dash and which one's a hyphen. And they're used for super duper different things. So you'll be able to tell. Let's start with I don't know, I think hyphens are easier. Let's start with hyphens. This is a really short rule, really easy rule. You're going to use a hyphen to separate a fraction. If you ever spell out a fraction out loud, you're going to use a hyphen. So like, if you want to say 2/3, you need a hyphen. 2/3, like that. Super simple. Alright. Now, there's another rule with these that if you have any word that starts with the prefix self, like self-determined, self-confident, self-aware, self-directed, you're going to use a hyphen in between. Anything that starts with self, you're going to have a hyphen right after it. Self-esteem is another one. Self-adoring, self-possessed. Can't think of any others, but there's plenty. A lot of these hyphen rules are going to be super duper direct and super specific, so they're not going to be like those common ones where you have to check stuff, you have to think about them. These ones are going to be super duper straightforward. You're going to know right away. Does everyone have that one good? Alright, the next one again, super straightforward. When you have something, a relative that is great, like your great grandpa, you're just going to put a hyphen in between. So when you have a great something, great grandpa is going to have a hyphen in between. Great uncle, great aunt, whatever. And along with that, in-laws are the same. So if you have brother-in-law, you're going to have hyphens between all of it. Brother, hyphen, brother-in-law, sister-in-law, whatever. You're always going to have hyphens in between. Alright, just two more hyphen rules quick. The next one is whenever we connect numbers and words together. There's lots of different times we do that. Like, if we're talking about somebody super tall and we say they're 7 foot tall, then we need hyphens in between there. And this is regardless of if that 7 is in word form or if it's in number form. So if you say like, no matter how you write this, you're going to need a hyphen in between. A lot of times you're going to be measuring the height of something, like a 50-foot wave, then you would want a hyphen in between. Another place you're going to see this a bunch is age. If you're talking about your 2-year-old sister, regardless of if you write the number 2 or you spell out TOU, 2-year-old is all going to have hyphens in between. Like that. Alright, is everyone good? There's gonna be one more hyphen rule, and this one, it's kind of hard to explain because it's not exactly, like there's not a definite rule for it. But when you see, I think they call it, what do they call them? Prepositional phrase. Nobody really knows what that means because it doesn't really, it's like, it doesn't give you any context. But it's like, or phrases like the jack of all trades, or like a bundle of energy, stick in the mud, Johnny on the spot, stuff like that. Like those little, I don't know how to describe them other than prepositional phrases, but like, we'll use stick in the mud for now. Whenever you write stuff like that, there's gotta be hyphens between everything. Let me see if I can find some more examples. Oh, 1 in a million is another really good one. 1 in a million. Those are all gonna have hyphens. Or down in the dumps. That's another one. So if somebody looks down in the dumps, you're gonna have hyphens in between all those. Does that make sense to everyone? Does everyone have examples for all these? Alright, cool. We will move on to dashes. This is our last piece of punctuation we have to cover for the ACT. There is more punctuation, obviously. There always is, but last one we're going to cover for the ACT. Dashes. You can use dashes to separate words in the middle of a sentence, kind of like a non-essential phrase. Now, the only difference between rambling in a sentence, dash, and here's a non-essential phrase. I put another dash and then I keep rambling, blah, 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 blah. The only difference between this and the commas is that this gives it a little bit more, it gives a little more power to whatever the non-essential phrase is. So maybe this is a little bit more important of a detail than just hugging something. So still you should be able to speak the sentence from here without all of this, from here directly to here. This is the most common use of dashes. You're going to see this all the time in comparison to the other dash rules we'll talk about in a second. Now again, this comes down to if you see two answer choices, one of them is blah, 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 comma, non-essential phrase, comma, blah, 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 and they both are phrased the exact same, there's no difference in words, cross them both out. This is a style choice for the writer, not for the editor. So they both are correct. You cross both of those out. So you can hug stuff with commas or with dashes. And our last rule today is that dashes, you can just add words to the end of a sentence. And you can only do this when there's a clear break of flow in a sentence. So like, if you have a sentence that could totally end with a period right there, but there's a logical break, you could put a dash and keep adding words. Let's see if we get a good example here. So, here's a good example. You could say like, this is a sentence by itself. I'm going to get a 36 on the ACT, which you guys should totally be saying before bed every night. And you could totally end it right there. But you could add a dash unless I don't study. Which none of you do. You are going to study really, really hard, I promise. Unless I don't study. You could totally add that to the end of the sentence with the dash. Does anyone need another example? Or does this kind of make sense? You guys get this rule? Okay, we've laid out pretty much all of the rules, punctuation-wise, you're gonna see on the ACT. And of course, there's also periods, but there's one period rule. You guys know how to use a period, so we're not gonna talk about that. So these are all of the punctuation rules you're gonna see. So with that cheat sheet you just made, I would just look that over anytime you have a break of 5 minutes. Like normally before school, I would just look at it while I was eating my cereal in the morning, or like before I went to bed while I was brushing my teeth. There's something really quick, glance it over. It's gonna help you memorize all these rules. And the next time you're taking an actual English test, these are gonna be super duper easy and second nature because you guys know them super duper well. So, you guys will read about these in your homework this week too, and they'll just solidify them even more. But use this cheat sheet as much as possible whenever you can. And these punctuation questions are gonna be super duper easy. Okay. We are now, should be on break now. So you guys have 5 minutes or so. Go to the bathroom, drink water or whatever. And then Manoj will be here after me and we'll be teaching you math. So I would grab a calculator and prepare yourself for better handwriting because mine is not great.